Brandon Mitchell is a Canadian who is deeply involved and invested in the Ukraine war. As a member of the Hospitaller crew, he has been evacuating people and the wounded since the beginning of the war. Brandon was born in a small Canadian town near the Atlantic Ocean. At the age of 17, he joined the army and served first in Canada and then in the UK. When the full-scale war began in Ukraine, Brandon could not stand aside. He decided that this was his war too. And please, before you get into the video, like, subscribe, share it, add a comment, because that really helps it to perform. Check out the links to Brandon's channel and the various sort of charities and initiatives that he supports, and also check out the list of Ukrainian charities, all verified charities doing incredible work on the ground that we will include in the description of the video. But Brandon, welcome to Silicon Curtain.
Jonathan, thank you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you for your patience. We've corresponded off and on since August, September.
Eventually, they always happen, and that only makes the anticipation greater. But I'd like to dig in first about, well, first of all, into your motives. What was it that you saw happening in Ukraine that really triggered your not only interest, but clearly it seems to have triggered a sense of sort of duty and an imperative to get out and do something?
I had, for lack of a better term or understanding, I had a psychosomatic experience. I remember, I've done a few of these interviews, so this is standard. Let's plow through this. I remember on the third day of the war, Mr. Zelensky asked for volunteers, and I thought to myself, somebody should help. So first of all, I lived in England for many years. I'm very involved in the boxing community, in the amateur boxing community. I knew a lot of people of all backgrounds, but one of my best friends, Anna, who's quite accomplished now, she's Polish, and Poland's quite close to Ukraine. I was living in Sweden. I'm in Sweden now, in Stockholm, and I was employed by an Estonian company. And I went to Estonia for 5 weeks, lived in Tallinn and trained in Tallinn. And I was really, really charmed by the Estonian people. I thought to myself, yeah, I streamlined my life with stereotypes. And certainly when I moved to England years ago, we had them. I was amazed by how progressive of a country it was, how developed it was, the infrastructure, the people. And I thought to myself, what a fantastic country, and friends. I didn't really know any Ukrainians. I only ever had one Ukrainian girlfriend once, a fling when I was 23. I had no connection to Ukraine except the fantastic boxers they put out over the years. But I seen it quickly as, okay, Ukraine will get rolled over, and then my friends are next.
Yep.
That was a personal connection that I felt, and I don't have children. As much as I love my dog, she's not a child, and I felt obliged. And when Mr. Zelensky asked, I had an opportunity. And then all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, I settled my affairs, and I felt a great strength come over me. Well, I rang my auntie and told her my plans, and I said, I hope you're proud of me. And I didn't want to die, but I felt compelled to go, and I didn't. That battle of Kiev didn't look too good to me. I didn't fancy our chances, but I just hopped on the wave, and it carried me through. It carried me through a great strength.
And you also have a unique skill, of course. Well, not unique, but you have a skill. You must have also had that sense that these skills are, they can be used for, civilian home front, but that there is a dire need for medical skills at the front. So is that also sort of a compelling?
The other day, I had to deal with a horrible disappointment from the Swedish Veterans Group that has funded all this money for our kits. And he said, were you a combat medic in the army? I said, no, I didn't even mention my military career in the past. I said I work. I built kitchens. We had a contract with IKEA. I worked for IKEA before the war, and it's all of a sudden I was the man sent to Coventry. He, no, for our American audience, yeah, he didn't want to know me. I had no medical experience, none whatsoever. That came later. That
Well,
came
that's
later.
interesting. That's an initial
Yeah.
process then. So how I know, many people have talked about that initial kind of experience, but what is it like for you? Were you immediately given role and a task, or did you have what some people have had, which is a sort of frustration of not being sent or deployed, and sort of being under assessment? What was your experience in those first couple of weeks?
Mm, I knew a man who knew a man who had a safe house in Lviv. This was all scary and novel to me, and it was a it was a busted out beauty parlor business, an esthetician, and the sign was still up in English, "The Secret Place." And there was 50 guys in there. There was Finns, British. I went with 4 Swedes, recently out of the army. Three of them had medical training, medical backgrounds, um, and this crazy place. One of them found through Instagram a Canadian man said, I'm in Hospitallers Battalion. It's a medical battalion, and we're all in Lviv." And they said, "We're going." And I said, "Well, I don't. I haven't held a rifle in years. I mean, I was in Northern Ireland in 2006. That's my combat experience. What happened there? Not much. Um, I was scared I'd get someone killed. I thought I'd be a humanitarian. I still don't know what a humanitarian does. It's a real broad blanket term, like a non-governmental organization. Um, no, I didn't fancy the humanitarian work. I drove to Kharkiv, delivering desperately needed supplies of nappies and dried pasta. Um, People still don't understand that this late in the war. It's Europe. You can eat sushi and you can go kill a Russian in 30 minutes down the road. Konstantinivka, the sushi's okay. Um, but I was so disenchanted with that, you know. And I said, I'll have some of that Hospitallers. The boys said, you should come. You should come. And St. Michael's Church, Joe Biden's been there. Everybody. I mean, the last crony he sent, I don't know his name. He came with a lot less, but he went to St. Michael's with $100 million aid package. I lived in St. Michael's. I lived in the basement. And very quickly, they had about 40, 50 foreigners, and they would make our teams, our ambulance teams. And those who didn't have medical experience, with the help of a French doctor, Edouard, an American nurse, Rebecca, they're both fantastic. They cobbled together very quickly a program for about 10 days, 12 hours a day, training program. And you would hear the noises to the north of the city, but I had no part in the Battle of Kiev. Just training, training every day, and yeah, that was that that was a good time.
And you must have formed, from knowing nothing about Ukrainians, apart from, as you say, the sort of random girlfriend. What impression did you form of Ukrainians? Because of course they're a diverse people, and there are of course differences from one area to another. Some areas are more, more Russian speaking, but that in no way
Mm.
makes them less Ukrainian. Just to be clear on that, because I know that's a point of Russian propaganda to pretend that somehow if you speak a language, you must be Russian or you must have a desire to become part of their political system. What impression did you form of Ukrainians as a people?
Hmm. Uh, well, number one, all I can observe, I'm like an animal, like a dog. I have to be very intuitive to body language, energies, and be ready to work and watch, do. Um, so the English speakers, when I first met them, they were really quite burdened. by foreigners for the limited amount of people that could speak English. And I mean burdened in the sense of having to translate or feeling some sort of sense of guardianship. I seen people that were very busy, had very little time for short talk. I had assumptions in my life that Slavic people had generally less pleasantries and more direct forms of communication. I'd experienced that in other countries, but I was really inspired by the citizen soldier, so to speak. You know, in our battalion, there was a woman. She's gone on to do fantastic things in the army. She drove a Maserati, and she had a racing career. You know, there was a man, another one racing the bikes. But I thought to myself, wow, I was inspired. Even the rich people fight in this war. She's one of the exceptions, certainly, but they're just normal people. Generally, you know, when I finally eventually did deploy on the Zaporizhzhia front, and I got to see the first actual hospital and beyond, and I got to see more my own working class, you know, living in a frontline town, but a town with a functioning supermarket, like the first supermarket than the Russians, you know, a chain supermarket. I seen the similarities, you know, that they had personalities, they had banter. The women were quite strong, you know. It's very much a matriarchal society, you know. When you get to Donbass, anybody who hasn't moved out over the past 8 to 10 years, if I can be honest, the men who are left are quite gormless. It's very strong women in those communities that don't let them spend every penny on alcohol. And I don't mean to say that in a derogatory way. I'm just telling you this is just purely civilian aspects.
Well, there must be despair. You know, of course, I mean, the temptation must be to, create some oblivion, because what they're living through is absolutely horrific. And we know, or we suspect, that the so-called, the conscripts on the Russian side have an extremely high level of intoxication to, I wouldn't say cope even, but to blot out what they're taking part in.
Oh, I'm not judging at all, but it's purely, you know, I grew up in a community in Canada that a lot of people immigrated to the West or emigrated because there was little social opportunity. So if you didn't know your path or join the army, you know, there wasn't much left in that town. You know, especially after the pulp industry crashed, basically a failed in. Yeah, there's a lot of that around the world. America has the Rust Belt from Sheffield on. There's some of those stories, but I seen a lot of that. I seen a lot of that in Donbass as well. I found more similarities. The more I traveled, the more we're the same.
And the other aspect, of course, on this is, not to give it a too grand a title, but Russian imperialism. Here you have one country trying to dominate another, trying to swallow it whole in a very sort of 18th, 19th century manner. You're on the grounds of helping individual people, but did you have that sense that you're really on the kind of bleeding edge of a country that is projecting extreme violence, extreme force, genocidal intent, and living an entirely different set of values to those which we think of as our own?
I'm not comfortable. Like I don't feel I'm the best person to answer this question. I'll be the first to admit what I don't know. With my 200 words Ukrainian Russian, and quite often I don't know what those words are. And that only seems to become an issue if it's a Russian word, if I'm in Kiev. Okay. It's a purely academic issue at this point, but I I know many people. I know many people that have family in Russia. They have family in Crimea. Uh, there's people in the army who have family in occupied areas. Um, this war has torn apart families, essentially. Now, maybe I would liken it to Hitler and the Sudetenland, and I couldn't quote the person. I couldn't quote the parliamentarian that said, well, who are we to judge this chap Hitler, if we were only to go back and claim Yorkshire after we've been out of it for 20 years. I feel there's this, and I've been told by Ukrainians, that there's this narrative, and it's been going on for many years, that Ukrainian is a dialect of Russian. That we're all brothers, we are all essentially Russians, and this has been propagated. This is not my experience. This is from people that I know and trust, who are my friends, and many celebrities have catered to the Russian market because it's a big market. The music industry, the television industry, for example. They know their audience, they know their profit. There was Ukrainian, in essence, it was a revivalist movement for the language. And I'm told by my friends, like they never grew, like a lot of people never grew up speaking Ukrainian, but that they made an effort to speak Ukrainian over the past 10 years. And it would very much fit with the Russian narrative that, no, we are all one people. But I have quite a few friends who would tend to disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the light of the extreme aggression. I mean, prior to the full-scale invasion, maybe
No.
people would view things slightly differently, or would see themselves as cutting across multiple sort of cultures there. But yeah, I mean, this seems to have changed an awful lot of things for many people. Obviously, your experience on the front line evacuating people, I mean, there must
Mm.
be a lot of trauma. I mean, it must be a fairly traumatic experience for you, obviously extremely traumatic for the people involved. Has that work changed through the course of the year? Because, of course, Ukraine has made some extraordinary gains in Kharkiv and Kherson. But last year, the full-scale offensive hasn't achieved those same results for reasons which I think are relatively clear now. Undersupply of weaponry, over-optimistic wargaming, all these kind of things. But has the nature of the kind of work you and your colleagues do really sort of changed as the ebb and flow of the war has changed?
Well, cumulatively, because I did leave Ukraine one time prior, I've been there just over 20 months cumulatively. Um, the number one thing that dictates the work, that dictates tactics, perhaps even strategy, is terrain or geography in terms of strategy. And that will change anywhere. That will change anywhere in if you're to go to Lemonsky region, okay, that will change in the ever so famous Bakhmut AO, Avdivka, the Zaporizhia front, which seems like a wide, endless expanse. I don't know about Kharkiv. I've never been, but in Kherson, it's very different. Now, when we talk about the front line, I'd like to take this time. It's a very abstract concept, and I take pride in being honest, even if I undersell myself. I've only ever been shot at by Russians twice, and I've only ever fired my rifle twice, and Did I hit anyone? I don't know. I did hit a drone once, and it turned out to be ours. Okay, and Starsky has that. If next time you have Starsky on, he can tell his story. It's better than mine. But I didn't pretend to speak one word of Russian or Ukrainian there. I put in a broad American accent, and I just walked away. They were quite angry. But no, I have been to the zero line a handful of times. I've been to the Russian side in Soledar, and it didn't go quite well. That's the only reason you have me on here, because I was blowing up in a minefield on camera. Everybody likes that story, and I've milked it to our advantage. But my work is, except with the exception of Kherson, generally is 2 kilometers back. Okay, so waiting at a 300 point. So it doesn't matter where you are, depending on the time of year and the resources, you need concealment. You need concealment. And what a 300 point is for wounded soldiers. There were cases, there are still cases. If you look at Yampol, the Yampol Forest, for example, up to Kremena, if you go to Belharivka, okay, there's areas all along there. I know you know this map, probably a lot of your viewers do. There's thick pine trees, and this Humvee is too thick. It's too wide. Range Rover works. So quite a bit like earlier in the war, you are left with the Pajeros, you know, the badass looking modified painted trucks, civilian pattern. But if you came further down to the AO, from Soledar on to the Klishkivka, there was no soft vehicles evacuating. So that the limited amount of work I did with the civilian evacuations, I've done plenty of that. But with the army, no, there was procedures. We had armored vehicles. You know, we had Soviet, we had Russian captured. When the M113s came in, you know, people on the internet like to criticize it. I think it's fantastic from experience. I think it's fantastic. So no, it's very different everywhere. It depends on the high ground, the low ground. Maybe you look at it and know it as the E20 highway. If you look on a map from Konstantinivka to Donetsk City, well, that highway is on the high ground, both sides. So that's a focal point. And I've never been the other side of that hill where that goes down. There's a sense of safety, not under direct fire, not in sight of direct fire. But our work changes. Our work changes in the sense that, you know, there will be spotted 3 BMPs. Okay, say in an area outside of Peromaivsky, and this is all the Avdiivka front, and it's like, okay, what village are they in there? Well, all right, there was a spotted T-72. There's a rumor that if they have a French optic, I'm not an expert, that they can shoot accurately 4 kilometers. I was like, wow, why don't I take this road instead? I'll take, me and my friend Philip used to say, do we take slow and safe or fun and fast? Yeah, so there's a lot of considerations by the terrain. It's everything is dictated by terrain, and everything else is secondary. And I mean secondary in terms of what the Russians have and what we have. But I don't know of the counteroffensive. I've been to Orikhiv when I came back from last time to deliver some supplies to a friend, and there's no natural advantage on the Zaporizhia front from everything. And I worked there my first 2 months of the war. First month in a hospital and a month with 1st Armored Brigade. I've participated in, you can't really count Kherson, but I've participated in 2 assaults, 2 operational assaults, like large scale, in Bakhmut last year, late November. early December, and I suppose my baptism, in a sense, if I could think of the word, with First Armored Brigade and the remnants of Azov, and in the first spring of the war in Zaporizhia, and the casualties are horrendous. When you want to take ground, you have to pay. You have to pay dearly, because we don't have a natural advantage, or the equipment that I learned about, or I knew what it looked like when I was in the army as a boy. We don't have that.
Air cover as well, of course, you know. I
Air
mean,
cover, air cover. When I've seen my first sortie, if you'll entertain me here, I tend to ramble on, and I want to tell you about Kherson, but I remember there with First Armored Brigade, and our first day, we had 65 critical casualties, from amputations to, um, they do their job well. They do their job very well. And naturally, between every wave, what do? We smoke. And I remember outside seeing those. Oh, I don't know my aircraft. Maybe they're a Sioux or a MiG. They were ours, and I seen them drop, and we seen them drop, and to great effect. And just like the movies, everybody cheered, and I looked at the doctor beside me, and we smiled. It was such a warm feeling. And when they flew by, the cheeky buggers, they did the wave, and that's that that front line that everyone heard about. That I don't. I was not in the counteroffensive, but I can tell you what the Zaporizhia terrain looks like. Um, the commander thought we were all going to die, and he's not a dramatic man. Um, I remember sitting outside on a swing, if you will, outside this community center in this little village we have, and this big god awful phallic truck with a big missile that I never seen, that looks like something from South Korea or North Korea, drives by, and I've never seen it before. And well, 2 minutes later, 5 minutes later, I hear the second loudest noise I've ever heard in my life. And then maybe a minute or two later, I heard the loudest noise I ever heard in my life. And that was the first summer of the war. And that's when they started talking about massive Russian ammunition dumps getting hit. And maybe that was the first one. And I seen the truck that made the world news when people still cared. Um, but anyway, after that, the Zaporizhia front, once those things started to happen, um, it became it became the stalemate. It became the dead ground of the war. Nobody. The news didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it. And I went to Donbass. Um, but the fact that those men had to go there after 1 year, I'm no General Ben Hodges, but it's very cruel. It was very cruel, and we were put up against it, and we were put up under pressure of politicians who had to sell it to their electorates. Um, no, I could talk more on how I feel it's unfair that we have to cater to the short attention span of democracy, but um, it, the front line in all our work was determined by terrain.
and did you get a
Uh,
sense of the scale? I mean, you got a lot of the front there you've mentioned, but if you look at it in its entirety, it's an extraordinary front line, isn't it? And you've still got borders with Belarus and borders with Russia, which are not, actively being penetrated, but they are points of risk. They are potential points of further incursion. It's a war on a scale that I think, is really comparable to the Second World War, and very little, in between since that period. Did you get a sense of that scale, or are you really only able to see a kind of microcosm of the action when you're there?
is only really concerned for our area. So I I knew the Bakhmut Soledar AO very well. I'm very intimately acquainted with Soledar. Um, Through my time helping out with the civilian evacuation work, I got a perspective that nobody in our battalion would get, or certainly in one of the regular brigades, because we would move along to Limonsky region, up into Luhansk, all the way to Makiivka when it opened, and certain preconditions had to happen for that. You know, there was one week we had several weeks we had a particular problem with Orlans, for example, and then that village would clear, and the next one. But to drive along these roads, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers back, if you can, 5 kilometers back, if there's a road, to get to Makiivka from, say, Kramatorsk, that's an hour and a half drive. It's not a motorway. There's some fast stretches, but to get to Bakhmut, to get to Konstantinivka, these are all the lifelines. It's no secret. They know more. They probably know more than we know about them. But there's a sense. I got a sense of a feeling of a disconnection. Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka would feed into the Bakhmut AO. Limonsky Rigon, because of the water, the bridges, the blowing out, there was very much a sense it was a different world. Izium, which later on became liberated, and that's a hub. It's like a different world, and you can't get to Avdiivka, or even the villages outside. You would have to head on the road halfway to Pokrovsk to go to Konstantinivka. So there's a sense of from life in the rear to life up onto the lines and the evacuation routes, that they're very different worlds. Yet it's all Ukraine.
And did you get a sense of the liberation? So Kherson, Izium, as you said, liberated, and then of course terrible stories kind of come to light. I don't know if you had any direct experiences or talked to people who had lived under occupation.
Yeah, in Limonsky Region, I helped ferry soldiers in during the assault, through these APC tracks, and that was in a Nissan Patrol. That was a beautiful bit of driving. That was, I have only ever got stuck once over those days, but I went into Limon the first day. It was cleared, and I remember cutting a cast off a woman. That cast had been on there for over 3 months, 4 months, I think, well too long, and cleaning her up. Yeah, the Russians did give them care, but they gave them well, it's better on the Ukrainian side. I'm not going to tell lies. I'm not going to say that they weren't, but there were things that happened over the days that followed, the weeks that followed, like in Yampol, down a cellar, we found a man, a civilian man, with his hands tied behind his back, in a fetal position, shot in the head. There was a list in one of the houses in a brown satchel, with over 300 names on it. Yampol's not a big town. Maybe it had 2,000 people, 3,000 max. So on paper, there was over 300 people executed and buried there. And one woman wanted to leave the town. She wanted to talk to the SBU, the security services. And this is all my friends translating to me, but it's juicy stuff. I'm trying to, it's interesting. It's very interesting, when you're involved, you want to know. she would only speak to SBU if they agreed to take her out of the town immediately, and because of the Russian sympathizers in the town. She wanted to reveal the location where the Ukrainian POWs had been executed. I know no more of it than that. There was a filtration process set up in Lemonski Region, and it worked. Not many people got through it because of the rivers and all the bridges blowing, and they would have to go through police filtration. I don't know how the process works. I have brought people there, and it can take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour. And there was a sense of, in the most case, there was gratitude. In some cases, there was perhaps indifference. Mostly gratitude. There was also people that they just wanted help. I have a generator. Do you have benzene? Do you have petrol? Do you like, what can you do for me? And that's fair enough. That's fair enough. There was one woman who her back was carved up, and she showed us she was from Makivka, and she stayed in the town. What we used to call activists, like civilian activists, and they're almost always women of authority. She was a maths and physics teacher in her 50s, and the Chechens, they came into her house with her husband. They beat him up, and they tied them up by their arms, and they said, "You'll show us where the guns are that you're hiding, or we're going to do a butcher in your house." That's what she told, and they filmed it. They took a knife to her back, and I've seen the scars. They put it on their telegram. They put it on their own telegram. Yeah, so I've seen all that stuff. I've seen the utter despair. I've seen people that wouldn't leave, and they demanded all their possessions being taken. And then there's one man, a mortar hit and blew. I used to give his kids Snickers driving on the way to Terne or Yampolivka. Nobody survived in Yampolivka who stayed. Yeah, I had me and my friend had to scrape up his body. The dog ran off with the shoulder, and someone took the kids away. He had a chance to leave for a week. We were giving them Snickers. Yeah, so I know all about liberation. I know all about liberation.
And I think it's
Yeah.
important. These details are important. I know John Sweeney's done his film on that, and he very much focused on it's very difficult to watch. Someone who'd been in the torture chamber and I guess was lucky to survive, but they took him back to that place where he was held for several months and must have been in fear of his life. I think it's important to air these details, not for, a sense of the not to revel in the detail, but to understand that when people call for negotiations with Russia, when people call for frozen lines and to give Russia territory, that is not peace. That is condemning people to many of the barbarities that you've described there. And I know you've expressed frustration with politicians, with the sound bites and the opportunities that politicians will make by being, say, photographed in Kiev and so on. But
I love it when they do it.
no,
It can only play to our advantage. I don't mean to interrupt. There's a lot of forces at work, and there's a lot of moving parts to this war all across the world, from the grassroots initiatives all across Europe that I can speak of, that help the army, that help the civilians. I've completely disengaged in my efforts from the civilian effort. I just see it as fruitless. The Ukrainian army must be supported as a priority. We don't have the luxury to. I know there's people that do it, that rescue cats and dogs, and my dog's my best friend, but that is not, with limited resources and time, that is not the priority, I'm sad to say.
and last question there, do you remain in some ways optimistic, given what you've seen of Ukrainian resilience. Russians, however, seem to be relentless, and they seem to have built an economy and a political structure that in some ways is dependent on war. If the war was to end and they weren't to have some kind of tangible victory, it's quite possible there'd be a backlash and some kind of collapse there. So you've got resilience and Ukrainian sort of values there, but you've also got an enemy who is far more, dare I say, tenacious and far more willing to take extraordinary costs to continue its aggression. Perhaps far more willing to do that than anybody suspected 2 years ago.
Last year, like 2022 or 2023, no, 2023. How it flies, time flies. I remember, like, if you asked me in April 2022, victory, rozum do paramoy. We will win the war. I believe in victory. I don't believe in anything else. And I can tell you it was our policy not to take ground, but to kill as many as possible. And in a defensive with a determined enemy on offensive, it's possible. A Rozvidka team moved into our house, a recon team. They needed a place to stay, and they were operating in the area. And then one night, they dropped an aviation bomb on our house, put a big crater. And yeah, I patched up a couple of the boys. I was the only one there. But that man is one of my best friends, Maxime. And he's been on my YouTube channel, not to shout my own channel here, but if I could, what he talks about war, and you won't understand it until you participate in it. He was telling me, he told in that video, and I didn't believe him. People wouldn't believe him, you know, and all my YouTube friends, Jake, Arthur, then as much as I love them, and they don't lie, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I feel they do a great disservice because Ukraine did this, Ukraine did that, but what did it cost? What did it cost? I know the costs. I know them. That's why I thought the counteroffensive was stupid. But Maxime doesn't believe in victory. He was telling me in 2023 how Russia is changing to wartime economy. See, you can speak Russian. You have access to those things. Russia is working on production capabilities.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to believe any of those things, what he told me.
Yeah.
Things have changed. Things have changed. And I think the media that's had to sell this victory to the short attention spans that the politicians have to work with in their 4-year terms. I don't think democracy is well suited for this struggle we have. I really don't. I mean, Mr. Churchill had a coalition. Clement Attlee ran the country while he ran everything else, and it was a good government. Attlee did great things in domestically. Churchill did what he did, and he's one of my heroes. But I wonder how good he is now, because I see the immense strain Mr. Zelensky's under, and I'm going to be honest with you, 50-50 victory. I know Russia won't stay forever, but does this have to be in Afghanistan? Does this have to be a Vietnam? And the answer is no. No, it does not. I know why Western countries are doing this. They want an intact. Even I know this. I'm a high school dropout. But they want an intact but weak Russia. But the truth is, with all the best intentions, the Kissingers of the world, with all their education, information that we don't have, it didn't always play out their way. I think we're playing with fire, and I know Russia will not stay in Ukraine, but what does that look like?
Absolutely.
That's completely up to, that's completely at the agency of Western governments.
Yeah. Well, I've been saying this on the channel, almost since the Battle of Kiev ended in a Ukrainian victory, pushing the Russians back. We've been interviewing people who have been saying that you need to move faster to defeat Russia, because the longer you drag it out, you're not managing the risk. You're actually creating more risk. And I think that's what we see at the moment. Russian aggression is spilling out all over the place, is invested in conflagrations and conflicts around the world. And they've still got a huge investment in information warfare, which, again, to your point, I don't think democracies are really geared up at the moment to fight the informational assault that Russia is doing. Ukraine has built a lot of resilience around that. I think we've barely started, so that it's a concern. It definitely is.
If I don't know the exact numbers, but they were told to me the other day, because I'm working with Swedes. It's a very different pace here, but it's a very difficult pace with the aid and people who give their time as civilians, but they're members of the Försvarsmakten, the Swedish defense forces, and little Sweden with their own defense industry, they really punch above their weight. Do you know that CV-90 tanks? There was almost as many CV-90 tanks as Abrams.
No, that I didn't know. I mean,
What
Gripens is something
what does
everyone's
that
focused on, but
what does that say? What does that say with the greatest military industrial complex in the world, that we want you to win, or we want to see how our tank works in mud? It works great in the sand, but I can tell you right now, the Leopard, and this is from my friends in Avdiivka that I talk. We don't talk often. Leopard plus plus, CV-90 plus plus, Abrams menos. So they gave their 50 tanks, and now they know how. Now they know, but that's. I do see hope, though. I do see a way. I do see a way to victory, but it's getting smaller. It's getting smaller.
Well, I hope people who make decisions watch this. I hope they realize that they are playing with fire by delaying this support for Ukraine, and they are shortening the odds of a victory there, whereas it perhaps would have been swifter and at far less cost if that equipment and support came earlier on, back in 2022, when it could really have made a difference. Brandon, I'd love to have you back on. Hopefully we get to meet in the real world. We've got various events coming up in the real world. We'll hopefully be sharing details of those on the channel with the audience, things they could perhaps participate in, especially if they're in the UK and Europe. But it's been a huge pleasure talking, and I very much appreciate you sharing your experience. I mean, especially the more traumatic one. I think it's very important for people to understand what's going on.
Thank you. And yes, as you said, there's some events coming up from the 14th until the 24th of February, culminating on the 2-year anniversary. There will be 5 Ukrainian medics, 4 and myself, who will be doing a tour from London, Edinburgh, Liverpool, Manchester, Cardiff, and back to London for the 24th. I will get you those dates. We're still waiting for a couple confirmations, but there will be public venues and public engagements. I'd be very grateful if you would share it on your platform, as all the other Ukraine YouTube platforms have been so supportive. I'll get those to you as soon as possible, and I hope we meet in person.
Definitely, I will do, and I look forward to that.
Thank you very much.